Hello there, I'm Adam Forbes. I am the author of Corporate Escapology and the host of the Corporate Escapology podcast. Today, my guest is Steph-an Lee. Steph-an worked for had a very interesting beginning to his career, actually, before he even started work, where he was on a path to a PhD and very clear medical engineering route lined up for him. But he decided to change course, drop out with his PhD, brave decision, and then start working in a variety of fields. He did an MBA as well, and eventually ended up working for Warner Brothers for Discovery Channel. And the interesting thing, I think, through the conversation with him is how he has brought together different layers within his life, different interests in his life, to turn them into what he's doing now, which is working for himself as a consultant, using some of the skills that he's developed at Warner Brothers and previous jobs, but also his passion for improvisation, and how improvisation, which is a hobby of his, he's turning that into part of his offer to other corporates to use some of the skills that he employs on stage with other people to help bring teams together, to help them innovate, to help them work through problems together. So let's meet Steph-an now. Hey, great to meet you, Steph-an. So thanks for joining the Corporate Escapology podcast today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Well, let's start at the beginning. What were your initial ideas for yourself? What did you dream of doing as a kid? Did you think you would go into business? Did you think you would do something creative? What were your kind of ideas?
Can you imagine? I thought I was going to be a professor of bioengineering at some esteemed. Yeah. I mean, not from like age 4, let's say, but no, the path of my childhood took me very much in that direction, and I thought that was kind of the only path. And I've since learned that that's not the case many times.
But so what was leading you down that way? Just that academic interest in that subject, or had you got role models or other people around you that were doing something similar?
Yeah, I mean, it was all of the above. So I just kind of, through the schooling system, gravitated towards science and maths, and then landed in biology as a major. Wanted to do bioengineering to kind of see the advancements of medical science to fruition. But the critical juncture was being so I grew up in the States, and being a college major in biology, but not going to medical school, leaves you very small number of options in terms of kind of approved, tried and trusted career paths. So I knew I didn't want to be a doctor because I didn't like the sight of blood. So that be with scientific research, which turns out was kind of the worst thing I could possibly do, given my personality and my interests.
And so did you start it then, or did you not even go down that route after you graduated?
Yeah, no, I am the proud dropout of a PhD program.
Oh, really?
So there you go. I've made it. I have credentials.
Okay. Gosh, how was that, dropping out of it? I mean, by that stage, you're like kind of feeling very committed to that PhD and that career path, I guess.
Yeah, and I think I guess there are echoes of that with different eras of your life afterwards as well. But having that thought that you've put all this time and effort into something and then it not working out, or you pivoting into a different direction, I kind of learned from that experience today, now that I've kind of pivoted out of a corporate job and starting to do my own thing. But it was tough. It was a very tough thing at the time. It was my first time doing it. The whole world around you you're literally surrounded by people who have PhDs in bioengineering because that's who you're interacting with. So yeah, if there's a moment you feel like the black sheep, that's one.
Yeah, that must have been really tough. And family, is it expectations, friends' expectations, that whole identity, Steph-an's going to be a PhD, Dr. Steph-an, all this sort of stuff suddenly removed very, very quickly.
Oh, yes.
How did you cope with that?
It's a journey. It's a journey. I mean, there's a whole, I don't know if you're familiar with William Bridges' transitions model. He's wrote this, wrote this big book on transitions. There are two flavors of it. There's one that's focused on business transitions and another one focused on life transitions. I wish I had had that book when I was going through that, because it was it was a hard time to kind of do it on your own. But he talks about every transition is a cycle, and there's a beginning, a middle, and an end phase. The beginning phase is when everything's kind of collapsing and you're getting rid of all of the habits that you had before. The middle phase is this tumultuous, nobody knows where they're going, but it can also be a time of creativity and a lot of joy and interest in terms of what's next. And then the final phase is that growth out of it, where you start to see the new path, you start to form your identity and your new teams there. But it's always like that in every transition. So there are always these phases. And the tricky thing is, if you're doing it by yourself, it's one thing. If you're doing it with a team, everyone's going through their change curve at different moments. So it's really tough to manage that.
So whilst you were kind of in that middle phase of that, where you're wondering what to do next, did you have some ideas, or was it just like crisis? I've lost identity as down that sort of medical engineering kind of route, PhD route, and now I'm just don't know what to do next? Or had you already started thinking?
I mean, it was both. There are definitely moments of crisis, but no, I went back to my values, kind of thinking introspectively, why was this not the right path? What makes me tick, what doesn't? I still like the idea of helping people and in healthcare, but I didn't like the solitude of laboratory work, and I didn't like the fact that everything was on very long time scales. So I thought, okay, is there a way to do healthcare for a lot of people more immediately? And that landed me into global health work, and then took me on a whole different path. Took me literally around the world. I lived in Rwanda for a year. I came back for an MBA to do a career boost in global health work. And then I had another pivot after that.
Okay, let's talk about. So
yeah.
So that MBA, there's interesting way you describe that then as a career boost. Whereas a lot of people use the MBA as a pivot, don't they, into something they didn't like what they're doing. They do the MBA and then move out of it to something else. But you wanted it to be a boost. So, but by then you decided that this was what you wanted to do. Then this global health kind of work.
Right. So that's why I say I entered the MBA with a career boost in mind, and I left with a career change instead. And it's actually, those are the two common models for an MBA student. So the vast majority of MBAs will be doing one of those two things. But I thought I was going in for the boost to get up the ladder, and I instead left with a change, because the job that I got after the MBA valued my African experience and on the ground work there, but it was in telecommunications. So it was a pivot into a telco firm that was trying to launch smartphone services across the networks in sub-Saharan Africa. They had a presence in Rwanda. I lived in Rwanda, and so that's what the match was.
I mean, that is very different from what you were expecting then. And so how did you sort of reconcile that? I mean, there was still maybe a sort of social purpose, which I do see as a common theme in your career, even up to date. But how did you sort of reconcile going into a completely different sector like telecoms after being in health, and even before that through the PhD work you were doing?
Yeah, well, I think the thing that really attracted me was the fact that I was still working with those populations. And so you're right that social impact is a through line through my career, and it continues today. It takes a very different form today, but that's something that I've always kind of wanted to give back and have something that has a meaningful purpose. So getting these countries, these populations connected through smartphone devices was a big step change. I mean, we all remember the revolution that it was, going from landlines to dumb phones to smartphones. And so that's what was happening at the time. And we were launching digital services, a music streaming service, going into video services as well. So it was really changing the way people were interacting with the telco service in general. And that had been a delight.
It was content then that you were working in as well. So, which again is a theme for later, for the next phase of your career too. So that content, it wasn't like just like a commercial role selling telecoms into these countries. It was bringing content that was then, in or on those telecoms infrastructure and things.
Exactly. I mean, at the time we launched a streaming service called Tigo Music, and it was a known brand in Latin America, and we ported it over to Africa. So I was, backstage in this huge Tanzanian music festival in Dar es Salaam, like with Tigo Music banners behind us. I mean, it was incredible. Got to know the state of Tanzanian music very well in, let's say, mid 2014, 15. And that was a once in a lifetime experience. Yeah. And the whole point of that was not only just to bring the joy of the content and the music and help the artists develop their craft, but then for the telco business model, it was then this is going to get loyalty to our service. It's going to get people using data. So we're not just selling minutes anymore. We're selling data. We're selling smartphones, etc. So that was the thesis.
And how were you feeling? I'm just still, because I'm so curious about the kind of how you sort of get through the PhD, like stopping the PhD. How were you feeling then about doing something so radically different from that original path then? Had you just said, okay, this is what I'm here to do, this is what I'm meant to do, this is what I'm going to do? Or were there moments where you were sort of thinking, how does this fit with the person that I was growing up and the person I expected to be?
Yeah, it was a big mindset shift. And I always go back to Steve Jobs when he had this famous 2005 Stanford commencement speech. And he talks about you can never connect the dots forward in your life. You can only connect them backwards, right? So yeah, I mean, on paper, I would have never thought that I would get here. I never thought I would live in London, where I am now. I never thought that I would be working in television or in the improv space, which we'll definitely talk about. No, I couldn't have imagined that. But every step of that journey along the way was sensible and was the right move at that right time. And so there's that through line that I can connect backwards. All of the projects that I've done have been strategic in nature. They've always been about developing new services, usually in the digital sphere, be it in healthcare, kind of digitizing health records, then to telco and digitizing that experience with music and video services, and now in television, which has obviously gone through a huge upheaval, going from traditional TV to streaming. So that's a through line that makes sense when you connect the dots backward.
Yeah.
Now looking forward, no idea.
Yeah, I mean, that's a part of life, I guess, really, if it was all planned out. I mean, because there are plenty of people that do have that path where they go, through academia and just stay there and never leave that. And and if you'd always planned that, I think, you might wonder whether there was a more interesting world out there that you might have missed out on, whereas you were out in Africa, exploring the world. Yeah, I can imagine it was, I mean, there's a lot of energy and excitement in what you were doing. And then there's a sort of sense of purpose, bringing what people in the West had just got totally used to countries that hadn't had access before.
Yeah.
And so how long were you working at Tigo like that?
That was 2 years. So that was my first job. That took me into London. Our Africa regional office was in London. So that was a big life shift. Suddenly grown up, done all my studies, done all my work in the US, and then I was packing up and making a new life for me in London. And that was a nice trial period, because after that 2 years ended and I was thinking, well, what's next? I realized that the whole experience that I had in London, I wasn't done yet. Yeah. And I needed to stay, and that was a real shift in priorities. And so I found a way to make it work, and now I've been here 10 years, and I don't regret it one bit.
Great, I'm glad. And so what did you do then after that time? How did you prolong your stay in London?
Yeah, so the next job after that was with Discovery, which is then where I really started building that television career. So I started at Discovery, which is now Warner Brothers Discovery. And that was, again, a role in strategy across international markets. This time it was the EMEA region. It included Africa, but most of our primary markets were in Europe. And so it was rolling out digital streaming services across our key markets in Europe, mostly with Discovery Plus and the Eurosport player, as well as new channel launches in the traditional TV space.
And so what sort of strategy role? So what sort of things were you doing as part of that strategy role? What sort of projects were you working on? What sort of skills were you developing and using? What was different about you in those kinds of settings that you brought?
Yeah, I think the eye towards well, strategy is all about what should we do, right? At the end of the day, it's what we could do many things with our money. What should we do? And clearly that direction of travel over the 7 years that I was at Warner Brothers Discovery was this disruption of the industry from just traditional television viewing to video on demand and ultimately, streaming services direct to consumer. So a big part of that was how do we manage that in each of our markets? Each of our markets have different portfolio sizes, strengths, and viewing behavior. But we all know that people are going to be craving video streaming at some point very soon.
Mm.
And so really that was launching the Discovery Plus streaming service to get all of our Discovery content in one place. And then that ended up handing over to what is now Max, which is the Warner Brothers rebranded HBO Max service. So now that's kind of the next iteration of that service.
Okay. So doing anything new like that inside a company, like transforming from within, is often a really big challenge. I'd tried to do that a few times when I was at BP too. I was involved in teams like that. And when you've got existing businesses that don't really want to believe the world is changing, and yet you're coming along with the change, there's a lot of tension that can arise there. Did you see that at Warner Brothers, at Discovery? Did you see that sort of tension between new and old, and how did you work through some of those things?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the skills set there is really, what does it take to be an intrapreneur? If we like that term. What does it take to kind of develop new innovative ideas within a large existing organization? And I have to say, looking at my 7 years in Warner Brothers Discovery, that was the common theme there. It was really launching, company-wide projects over and over again, both internal and external, that really drove that growth for me in terms of what it means to be a good corporate citizen, and ultimately taking those skills outside of corporate and trying to start my own thing. But it was all about, this is the status quo, this is the huge organization, how do we change it? One of the things was dealing with that traditional digital divide with our product. But internally, we were also struggling with everyone's in silos and they're not talking to each other. This is a massive global organization. And if you can't harness the power of the employees learning from each other, what worked well in Australia, what worked well in Brazil, can we do that in Italy? There was no discussion for that. There was no room for that conversation to happen. So what we did was we launched an internal platform for employees to connect to each other. And that was a huge change in how we interacted. Suddenly you could ask questions that you couldn't before, because you wouldn't send an email to a company of 10,000 people saying, hey, can you help me out with this? But because we launched this employee engagement platform where everyone had a profile and you could comment on things and you could share what work you were doing, you could finally see a trailer that was doing well in the Nordics and say, oh, well, okay, we have the same products, but it's in Spain, but can we steal something from the Nordics and copy and paste that in Spain? You wouldn't do that before. But now that world dramatically shrunk with this new platform, that was a huge entrepreneurial kind of endeavor.
It's so interesting always to me, because how this kind of back office to a corporate that no one really sees, particularly one that's sort of consumer facing like Warner Brothers, that you just imagine these things, well, you don't even probably give it much thought, really. These things just appear and you consume them. But actually the work that goes on to drive the collaboration, to drive the efficiency, to ensure the innovation is happening in the organization, this takes real work to do, because the instinct is for us all to be very siloed. So to break down those silos, through technology, through culture, through, orders from on high and strategy, I guess, to a degree as well. Those sorts of things are huge jobs in themselves that, it would be difficult for most people in the outside world to even really relate to unless you've worked in that sort of world. It seems like, can't this stuff just sort of happen? But as soon as you get that multiplier of people involved, you then have to put things in place to marshal that. Otherwise, it stops working really. And I guess in your case, the innovation would have stopped, the sharing would have stopped, and it would have driven up the costs of all of those businesses too, as they started to share their content outside.
Yeah, and thanks for kind of acknowledging that is work that is done, that exists. The toughest part about that is making it quantifiable and showing the tangible impact that having a good culture, having a spirit of collaboration behind the scenes really does affect the output. And that's something that is, a struggle to kind of prove the worth. But when it's not there. Yeah. It's one of those kind of jobs where if it works, everything's great and people are happy and aligned. If it doesn't work, then you've got a lot of problems to solve that you didn't realize you had. And so you take a world of creatives. I mean, these people are passionate about bringing the best stories out to audiences to delight them over and over again. But if the house is on fire inside, or you can't get the things that you need, or you can't really be creatively free in your mind and link with other people, and then you're going to stifle that ability to create externally with your product.
7 years is a long time in one company. I don't know what media's like, probably not as long as energy and oil and gas, where people stay for 25, 35 years in one company. But 7 years is a reasonable amount of time. What made you decide at that point, I've got what I needed here and it's time to move on to do something else?
Yeah, I think it was a number of things that all kind of, the planets aligned, let's say. So Discovery merged with Warner Media. It's now Warner Brothers Discovery. It's an even bigger media entity. It's got incredible properties, including HBO. So it's the home of Game of Thrones. It's the home of Harry Potter now. So, I mean, it's massive change. But then internally, that also caused a lot of, chairs to be shuffled around. And so it was a point to take stock and say, okay, well, what does this career look like in the new world? Trial it out. But at the same time thinking, okay, well, maybe, this 7 years was a really great growth trajectory. I learned a lot, but I've changed, the company's changed, the world has changed. So let's take stock and see, does this still fit? And is this still the right direction? So I use that opportunity to then say, great, this is an amazing experience. I'm going to step aside, let this company evolve as it needs to. And I'm going to try working on my own projects now. And that was kind of that, decision-making point.
And so, well, can you tell us a little bit about that, the thinking that was going on there? Firstly, were there moments that were like triggers for this? Had it been brewing for a while? How long did it take? Did you take time out? Did you have support, coaching, to go through? How did you actually go through that process of leaving something that was, you've got quite attached to in 7 years and started to define you, to decide, right, I'm going to go and take this very big, brave move to work for myself?
Yeah, I think the leading pull was this grand merger, right? So that really shook up a lot of the world. And I think there's a lot of commonality with other folks that have left corporate at that kind of juncture. Yeah. So there's an opportunistic moment where everything's kind of changing, and it's a time to take stock of what you want to do at that point in time. So I think that was really what set the stage. And then it was, okay, well, now how do I think about this? What are the possible roles that I can have in the new world within the corporate structure? What are the things that I've really enjoyed over the 7 years in my career in television? And can I do that somewhere else? And maybe it's time to just take a break, because I've been working for, X number of years and haven't really taken some time off. So when that decision finally got made, took a gap year. I've never had a gap year, and it was wonderful. Yeah. And so that was something I promised myself, had some time structure around it, and said, okay, let's enjoy it. It was a mix of kind of seeing family and also just traveling around. And it was wonderful. So it was a nice time to say, okay, that's a chapter in my life. Now let's move on to the next thing. But it also gave me the learning of what are the things that I really enjoyed about the time in television, and how can I carry those forward? One of them was the building of communities. So like that example of building that employee engagement platform internally, that was all about creating community. And so I thought, is there a way to do this on a system-wide scale rather than just a company-wide scale? Mm-hmm. And so that has that ingredient of community building and then drawing back from the past of social impact collided, and now has manifested into two advisory roles that I have, one with BAFTA and one with a fund that's led by Comic Relief called the Power of Pop Fund. And those two programs are really about getting marginalized stories from marginalized communities more visible on screen in television and film. So it's all about sharing a diversity of voices, a diversity of experiences that haven't been told or haven't had those resources behind them.
Oh, I see that. Yeah, great. I mean, so just to step back a little bit into the thinking, I mean, this theme keeps coming back again and again in nearly all the conversations I have about having space and time and space away from what you're doing to decide what you do next. It's so hard, almost impossible maybe, to be in the midst of all of that 9 to 5 that's not 9 to 5, 9 to 8 or 8 to 8 or whatever job, and decide what is right for you beyond that job. You need that space. So you took a year out, other people go on retreats or, shorter sabbaticals. Other people have coaches where they just take themselves out of that setting for, an hour or a program maybe to try to understand themselves and what they do, what they enjoy, what gives them energy, what gives them drive and purpose. So you took that year to do that. And did you work at all in that year? Did you practice any of what you thought you might want to do? When did these advisor roles kind of start to appear during that, after you left Discovery and Warner Brothers?
Yeah, good question. And I first want to acknowledge, the great privilege it was to have the ability to do that gap year and to take the time to think about, what the next step is. This is not something that everyone can do. So I really do want to honor that ability to do that. But I think I got to a point in my career where I had built up enough of a buffer around me to be able to support that decision. So that was really first and foremost what allowed any of that needing to happen. And then in terms of how the pieces started to fall together, it's a sliding scale. So it wasn't like day one, we're going to start doing the new thing. It was really, okay, now I have to leverage my network and what are the opportunities that are available? I had the BAFTA role overlap with the tail end of Warner Brothers Discovery. Okay. Then I could put more time into that. That segued into an opportunity that came up with the Power of Pop Fund, because they were looking for an advisory board at the time, and so on and so forth. But one of the fascinating things was the year that I spent outside of Warner Brothers Discovery, that first year, despite having been in the television industry for 7 years, I felt like I was more plugged in to the network and what's happening and what events were on and who's who in that year afterwards, because I was now forced to do it. I didn't have that cushion of the cocoon of the walls. And my role being in strategy was fairly internal. So I was learning a lot about managing internal stakeholders and a lot of people within a very large organization, but it wasn't external facing. And now suddenly I was very external facing. And that was a whole different world, whole different skill set that I'm still learning today.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I mean, that's very common as well, that because most people really in a corporate are internal facing. There's only a small number of people who actually are very external facing. And so naturally their networks are all inside, they're the people that need to get things done. And then when you flip it to go and you leave that network inside is then less useful to you. And if you haven't built one up, but you can be, come unstuck, or it can take time to build. But I'm guessing it wasn't as binary as that for you. You must have been building it maybe unconsciously, or maybe just through people coming and going that had allowed you to build the contacts into BAFTA and to other things that then could start to materialize. But it's interesting that even if you have got these contacts, it's still not enough. So you still need to keep doing it all the time. And ideally, you want to be in the job doing that at the company's expense, really, building your external network rather than finding yourself outside and then having to build from scratch or at least, from a lower point. I mean, that was my experience too. It does take time to do that. And of course, you're more attractive in a way inside the company for others to get to know you than you are as an outsider. So there's actually a logic to doing it before as well as just the efficiency.
Yes, but my friend, you know how many times I've torn up the script in my past already. So there was no big task to just rip it up again and not do it the proper way.
Yeah,
I think
once you've done it, your confidence in yourself increases that you can make good of it. If this was your first time, like the PhD, then yeah, you may have been much less reluctant to take the risk and back yourself.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's all, it's all learning. Nobody told me to quit the PhD. Nobody told me to move to Rwanda. Nobody told me to change my life and settle down in the UK. So I think knowing that I can do those things means that, okay, maybe I can do some other things as well.
Yeah, great. Okay, cool. Well, we want to get to the improv. That's the kind of the cool bit. The improv bit happen in all of this. Well, first of all, like tell us a bit about what improv is and the kind of improv you do and why it's different from stand-up. That's what's interesting.
Yes.
Too.
Well, most people know improv. So improvisation in general is making things up on the spot, right? So you haven't rehearsed it, and it's all organically there for the first time. That's generally what improv is. Most people know improv comedy through Whose Line Is It Anyway? It was this great UK show. They brought it over to the US where I used to watch it as a kid. Then they made a US version, as we always do. And so that's how most people get their first exposure to improv comedy. But there's this whole industry behind it, and there are theaters that do live performances of improvised comedy kind of on a nightly basis, all throughout London and in many parts of the world. So that's what improv comedy is. What drew me to it was just being a fan originally, and then actually during the MBA, I had 1 year of actually trying it on my own. So there was a student group that formed. That was my first taste. Never thought I'd do it. And then once I moved to London, one New Year's resolution was, let's try to do an improv class.
Really?
Yeah. It's the best New Year's resolution I've ever done. I'm not doing them anymore because nothing can compare to the outcome of that one. Yeah. So I started taking courses here. That led to more things. It started me starting groups to do improv on stages. So I've been regularly performing, I think now for 8 years. Have created new groups. One of them, the lead one, is called Comediations. We're actually the first UK's pan-Asian improv group. So kind of, again, in the spirit of bringing diverse stories on stage, there's sadly still a lack of Asian voices and stories in comedy, and specifically in improv. So we've got the group together and we're doing monthly shows now.
And honestly, I cannot think of anything more terrifying than standing on a stage and improvising. It's bad enough standing on a stage with a script. You know exactly what's going to have to happen. How do you do it? How do you make it work? How do you get your brain working fast enough that you can not only kind of keep a flow, but be funny and entertaining as well? What do you learn in those kind of courses that made you think, yeah, this is for me?
Yeah, it's a common thing that everyone's kind of terrified of improv. I find other things terrifying because I think improv, the mindset shift for improv for me is the goal is not to be on stage with no script and then suddenly be funny. That's not the goal. That's actually the outcome. The goal is creating something meaningful with a group of teammates and helping them look better at what they do. So you're on stage suddenly and you've got nothing prepared. And people know that's the ground rule. And then you have to create something out of nothing. And what I do is I rely on my teammates to come up with ideas, pitch one in. It doesn't have to be perfect. Then the famous rule in improv is yes and. So whatever that person says, I then say yes to that idea, and I build something on top of it. And suddenly, after a series of steps, you now have a whole world that you've built out of nothing. And then the comedy aspect just is an output of that. It's because of the way that you built this world together. So when you start thinking of it as, oh, my job is not to be funny with nothing prepared, and instead my job is to make my teammates look good, and then I will look good, and then we'll all look good. That then takes away the fear, and then brings in that joy of creation.
It's so interesting because we talked before about this. Because I would have just thought it was quite an individualistic kind of experience, having watched Whose Line It Is Anyway as a kid. But there were ones and twos that I particularly liked, and the rest I couldn't be bothered. But now I think about it, of course, they were all collaborating together. There, it was, and it was the program you loved. Otherwise, you'd have gone and watched that comedian on their own somewhere. There was something very sort of joyful and entertaining about them all doing it together. And so,
Yeah.
and so, of course, there is a parallel here back for the work you're doing, not just for the work you're doing extracurricular in your evenings, but actually in your work too, in the consultancy and the offers you're making. You're trying to bring this metaphor of improv to organizations, teams, and projects and collaboration opportunities. So tell us more about that.
Exactly. So the project that I'm really incubating right now is trying to do improv in a corporate training module, right? Because the techniques of improv theater, what makes good improv is really just what makes a good coworker. I mean, any conversation you have, the conversation we're having right now is improvised. The conversation you have in the boardroom to decide the future of the company is in part improvised, because it depends on what is in the room at that moment. And the way that you react to each other, the way that you can co-create something as a group, that's all the skills of being a good improv team. So I trialed this out when I was back at Discovery, trialed it out at BAFTA. There's such an overlap in terms of training oneself personally and also professionally to develop your skills in the improv world that I want to share that with all organizations. So that ranges from, how do you actually sharpen your presentation skills, your communication skills, because we're literally standing on stage doing something out of nothing. So you can copy and paste that into the boardroom. How do you show up in a meeting where you have to start saying things on inputs that you've just received from someone's presentation on the screen? And that is a skill that you can practice and hone. Team creativity. Everyone's talking about how do you innovate the next thing? What is the future? How do you get rid of old business models and start new business models? That requires brainstorming and creative environment that foster new ideas rather than being shut down. And those are improv skills as well.
Yeah. And as you say, the sort of yes, and some of these behaviors that we've had to sort of embarrassingly learn in corporates, to be encouraging to listen to one another, to not be talking over one another. Of course, improv doesn't work if two people are talking. You don't know where to look, do you? So sort of choreographing how you can. It's your turn to speak now, and then it's your turn to listen. That sort of basic way of making improv work is how we are trying to increasingly make boardrooms and leadership team meetings work too. And the other thing that strikes me is the trust that you form. Obviously, the improv cannot work if you don't trust one another. And really at the heart of this is trying to build trust in teams so that you're all there to make the best decision. No one ego is sort of rising up and coming at the expense of another person's ego or confidence.
Exactly. You hit all the right notes there. So imagine a world where this is kind of the way things were. It would be brilliant. It would be amazing, and teams would function more effectively, and we could get a lot more progress out of every meeting. So that's the thesis, and that's the thing that I'm trying to build towards. But the yes and is that fundamental truth. That's the fundamental rule where everything stems from.
What kind of reaction have you had from businesses? You mentioned you've done this a bit at Warner Brothers and about what kind of reaction have you had to this approach in a business?
So we did this as actually the kickoff of the BAFTA Elevate program, the one that I've been mentoring for 2 years. So this is 20 top tier producers across film and television that have gone through a 2-year kind of mini MBA crash course in the industry to boost their career. And the first session was none of these people knew each other. We were all in a room together. And I said, hey guys, let's do some improv exercises. And the horror in the room was so palpable. But we just recently had our end of 2-year celebration to kind of mark that experience. And so many of the producers came up to me and said, I still remember that improv day that you do that at the very beginning. Like that helped my confidence so much because we had to do these exercises where they felt very uncomfortable, but still very supported. And we did things on their personal branding, their presence in the room, how they got introduced to each other, what their reputation therefore is when they're not around, how people talk about them.
So that is an offer you're making now. So you've got a business that is selling those kinds of services to other businesses, corporates. So how do people find you? How do people find, if they like the idea of this and the transformation it could cause, it could create was their teams. How would they find you?
Yeah, sure. Find me on LinkedIn, connect with me there. I would love to say I've got a slick website and a book and everything, but no, I am on a certain part of this journey, and I've really enjoyed listening to the other folks in the corporate escapology universe, because I get a lot of inspiration from people who are a bit further along in that journey. But for now, LinkedIn is the best place to connect with me on any of that.
Great. And you're also doing the same. You're using your corporate experience on the strategy side to do a bit more traditional kind of consulting too, for businesses that have got thorny problems they need strategic minds to solve.
Exactly. Rounding out this new portfolio life, as they call it, is kind of the corporate work in that organizational effectiveness space. So going back to that internal platform that we launched at Warner Brothers Discovery, to suddenly connect all employees in a social forward way rather than a just bureaucratic way. We are working with large clients across a number of industries and sectors to help them manage their employee engagement platforms more effectively. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, you're literally bearing out this bit of the escape method that I developed for the book. The second part, which is kind of audit, taking an inventory of your skills, experience, and know-how, and not being so narrow or restrictive or humble to just focus on what you currently do, but actually look at really the whole world around you. Where do you get your energy from? What excites you? What interests you? Where have you been successful in the past that maybe you're not even able to demonstrate right now? But look around all of that and say, how could I use this amazing package of skills and experience and the knowledge I know, the data, the networks, and turn that into ways to make money that allow me to afford my life, but really enjoy my life too. And, you're absolutely bearing out that point. It's not just taking, right, I used to be at Warner Brothers doing a strategy role, therefore I can only do strategy roles from now on for big corporates in the media sector, but actually drilling much deeper down and saying, well, what are all the things that I've done before? And finding these moments where you really did something different, but it interested you as well as energized you, like this employee platform thing there. Say, okay, this is something that we could package up with some friends maybe and sell to others. And I would love it. They would get the value from it. Everybody wins. And I just see it's such a great example, because it's all these layers that you've got to your experience over the years, and you're just picking all of them and turning them into little ideas that could become businesses. They're experiments at the moment, and who knows where they end up, which is super exciting.
Exactly. There's something that I learned from Squiggly Careers. I don't know if you've come across it. Fantastic organization. But one of the things they taught me was, what is a strength? And people will say a strength is usually the thing that you do the best or the thing that you do better than other people. And they said, actually, no, there's a mindset shift there as well. That a strength isn't necessarily what you do better than others. It's what gives you the most energy, even if you're not good at it yet. And that was a totally different view of strength, because they were saying so many people will get pigeonholed into something that they're seen as being the best at, but they actually don't like doing. And so for me, it was like this path towards project management, consulting experience, etc., running projects. Oh, I'll be a project manager. And I seem to be doing it okay, enough to kind of fool the other people around me. And then that just gets you more and more into that track. And so suddenly it's not a strength, because I didn't find energy in that.
Right. I think sometimes you've got to think about what's the way to make money. If you need to make money, which most of us do, then it may be quite literal what you do next that links to what you did before, because that's where you're best known. So in your case, you may actually, I need a cash cow called project management or strategy, because that's what I've done before. That's what I'm known for. That's what people expect. But the great benefit of this portfolio of careers is you can do that for a couple of days a week and then build, and that can make maybe enough money for you. If you're really lucky, you can make enough money for you that you can live on that. And then the remainder of the time, you're doing stuff that are playing more to your energy, the things that energize you. And then over time, you're just phasing out the stuff that gives you less energy, because the other stuff is built by then. I mean, I think a great model for others to learn from Yeah, and hopefully get some inspiration from it. And I think just this kind of like the improv thing, something that could be perceived to be a bit of a hobby. How can I make the things that give me joy outside of my work part of my daily work, and the things that could potentially, be the main way I earn my money, and how I get known for doing something like this that I love doing, rather than something that I'm just happen to be perceived to be good at.
Yeah. And your model is essentially what the Japanese concept of ikigai, right? So it's those 4 pillars of what you do best, what the world needs, what you can make money from, and what is giving you passion and joy. So if you can find something that puts all 4 of those components together, then that's bliss. But otherwise, you can kind of portfolio it and get little bits that you want from each.
Yeah, and recognize that at different times, I think in that transition, they may flex those things. There's a recognition. I think I would recognize in the first 2 years, I'm craving some stability, and that's leaving a job that was very stable. I need to create some stability, partly to sort of manage stakeholders, i.e. my family around me, and partly just to kind of calm me. So there is some stability. And then over time, as I realize this becomes the new life for me, then I can relinquish some stability for some more ideas, options, experimentation, to a degree. It's not quite as simple as that. But I think, recognizing that all those components, they have different times when they pull on you more, I suppose, really, just because, you're dealing with that context that you live in called the real world rather than
that pesky thing. But yeah, no, it's again, with an improv hat on, it's the ability to manage those ups and downs and to really flex when you need to ride those waves. It's not always going to be like that. It's not going to be static. That's for sure. Everything's going to change. That's the only thing that's certain, right? And so it's a matter of managing you and how you fit to the context around you at every given moment in time. And sometimes that's super dramatic things like packing up my bags and moving to London. And other times it's experimenting on the fringes. So it's, I launched this great platform internally. Can I help other companies launch the same platform?
Yeah, great. I absolutely love that. Well, thanks so much, Steph-an. It's been great speaking to you. I know it's going to inspire people, because I think you've shown how you can use the kind of full range of things that you bring to turn that into different business opportunities for them too. I think they will see that, and I hope it will build their confidence that you're doing it. Why can't they do it? So thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much, Adam. And if I could leave with one thought, it's I just truly believe everyone should try improv at least once. It's so fun, and it gives you skills that are useful just to be a good person.